Before we begin, I just want to say, take this dream. Look at those analytics. Look at that. So anyways, today it's a little bit of a new sort of thing where I'm going to have a pre-recorded video of me playing this new Let's Play. Rather than me talking live on the video, I instead do it pre-done. Not pre-done, more like done afterwards. And then, kind of put it all together. I think it's a bit more, how do I say, more organized for me to really do this instead. And also allows me a chance to really talk, but also to edit and, redo the talking as I go, while still having something smooth to look at in the background as well. So, I was thinking that today we talk a little bit about Chinese history, since it's something that I tend to be very fond of and also seemingly knowledgeable in a lot of cases. So specifically, I want to talk a little bit about the kind of semi-modern era of China, not necessarily like modern like 80s and so on and so forth after Deng Xiaoping's reforms, but more so like during the Republican era. So I know like a lot of people recently have been talking about like this sort of era, especially when it comes to China, and I really enjoy the fact that they've been doing it. Now, this is something I'm more of just a personal concern of, is that when they do talk about this sort of topic, I feel a lot of times they tend to really forget some of the important not really important, but more like I guess you could say critical. Like there are these critical pieces that they tend to forget when talking about Chinese history, and especially in this era where a lot of this information is mostly in Chinese and not really readily available in, say, English or German or French. And that really, for me, is something I like to point out a lot in those type of videos. And so, for anyone who does watch me and, kind of maybe looks around at what I do in terms of, outside my own channel, like onto other videos, I do tend to comment a lot on these type of things and these type of points, because I feel like it is very vital in part of understanding the topic. So today I really want to kind of talk mostly on those type of issues I have with those kind of videos, and to basically bring out clarity that I believe should have been done by those type of creators. Now, don't get me wrong, they're amazing creators. Like, they have amazing art, they have amazing history, they really seem to do a lot of research in what they do. It's just that I'm just a little nitpicky on like these very small issues that I feel like have a really large impact in how people, especially who aren't Chinese or don't really fully understand this type of era, can really understand or fully grasp. And having that extra little piece, I feel like can really help bring a full circle and understanding on exactly what happened, why happened, and like how those type of things happened as well. Now, I do understand that I'm not fully prepared, to talk about this topic 100%. I don't have like many, I guess, sourcings or to like really show off exactly what I mean, but because it's more like a tangent or a rant to really talk about this type of stuff. So there are a couple channels I will link in the bottom below that you can take a look at and see the videos, and maybe for you might see, hey, this is not all that bad. I think they understand the point pretty well. For me, it's I think it's just more like a different perspective and point of view on the topic. There is a lot of debate going on, especially when it comes to these type of videos, and talk about the Second Sino-Japanese War, because of how data could be varying a lot based off of estimates of, say, a Western source, a Chinese source, or a Japanese source. So for a lot of battles when it comes to the Second Sino-Japanese War, there are a lot of examples where the Japanese death toll was far much less than that of the Chinese. Say at the Battle of Nanjing, the Battle of Shanghai, Taiyuan, Changde, even Wuhan, and there becomes this false perception that it's going to be a death rate of like 1 to 20 or something. When you actually do look at those casualties, it's not as bad compared to what people may believe. Although I do agree it's still bad. It's usually like 1 to 3 to as much as 1 to 6, depending on what battle it is, which units are fighting, and like where the battle is occurring. And this is where I guess I'm going to start kind of structuring this video where I really want to talk about a couple major topics, mainly equipment, casualties, and also political structures of the time. Now, this is going to be a very hefty topic, and depending on how well this goes, I may expand a little bit further on this, with a little bit more research, a little bit more documentation, I guess, though I do have to prepare for it. Now, don't forget, I still have to do the Livelihood in America project, and I also have a little something very special that I'm trying to work on for the 9th anniversary of the Mukden incident. And this is something I really want to put some effort in. I hope my absolute best that's going to be the same quality, if not better, than the current one I have for the 800 Heroes, the one I made for Suhong Warehouse last year, I believe. That's probably my favorite video on this channel that I have made so far, and I want to try and surpass that. So I'm going to really try to finish up what I have now so I can put all my focus on that, because when I get to school and stuff, I won't be able to have the time to really do too much on YouTube. So that may be the final thing I'll probably pull out before I really start dropping again in my activity, and then going to school and all that, whatever and whatnot. So the first thing I want to talk about is, as I mentioned before, casualties. It's something that a lot of people tend to have a misconception of in the Second Sino-Japanese War. You can do a quick, couple Wikipedia searches, or you can, be a little bit more formal and look at some other sources not from Wikipedia, because some people don't trust it. Though I feel like it is a good gauge to see, get a general idea of certain things. I understand it's not the most accurate and maybe not the best of sources you could use, but especially when you look into, new topics or something you don't really understand, it's a good place to really start and to at least get the minimum basic understanding, or to at least grasp the idea of the situation or the ideas you're looking into. It's a really powerful source, and I feel like that if you just, take a look at, see a couple battles, you can really see where I'm coming from. There's the Battle of Kunlun Pass, the Battle of Taiyuan, the Battle of Nanjing, the Battle of Wuhan, the bombing of Chongqing, the Battle of Pingxingguan, the 100 Regiments Offensive, the Battle of Wuhan, the Battle of Changde, and many, many other ones. And as far as I have taken a look at, kind of browsed, I have not seen a battle yet where there actually was that 1 to 20 scale that a lot of people misconceive. It's usually much closer, as I mentioned before, usually 1 to 3, 1 to 4, or at best 1 to 6. And you can see even in some cases, like at the Battle of Changde, where it's a really close match. I think the Chinese suffered 43,000 and the Japanese suffered around 40,000, but as I mentioned before, that's based off the sourcing. I'm pretty sure from what I recall, that really close casualty rate was a Western source that gave that estimate, but based off Japanese sources, it's a bit less. I think 1 to 2 or 1 to 3, somewhere around there. Don't quote me on that. I didn't really check before, making the video. Now, I understand that I am going kind of briefly about this, though it is something that you have to really put in effort to look in, and I'm just making this really quickly because this is something I'm just really testing to see if you guys are engaged in it, see if you guys like it, but also see if I'm willing to really push the effort to make this type of content. Now, I understand I have an issue with content, sometimes I make something, I don't finish it, or I discontinue it and I forget about it, something like that happens. It's a lot really passion based, so sometimes I tend to kind of drop it. There are some things I did in kind of plan to make in the past, though I just actually never got to it. So my apologies on that. So next topic I want to talk about is technology and weapons, something I'm a little bit more understanding of. So the Japanese had this weapon, the Arisaka type 38. That was the most common rifle that the Japanese Imperial Army used. It was used the 6.5 by 50, I believe 50 millimeter, which that's the caliber of their bullet. That's the cartridge, and then the Chinese used a much larger 7.92 by 57 millimeter, which was the common one the Germans used from their Mauser rifles. This is because the Chinese, especially in the later stages of the Qing dynasty, began to adopt foreign weapons and foreign models, such as the Hanyang 88, which is a Chinese variant model of the Gava Model 8, 1888. And it kind of adopted similar stuff, mainly the reloading system, like the action, which is a bolt action, and also the style of the Mauser rifles, including the bullet itself. For much of China's Civil War period and like this era of turmoil, the 792 by 57 millimeter Mauser cartridge would be the most common one in use. Some other ones would be in use from time to time, especially if they got foreign models such as the Mosin Nagant, the Lee Enfield, and the Springfields. And the reason why they tend not to use those ones over the Mausers was because the Mauser bullets were more readily available. So it's better if you had a gun that your enemies also had, because then you could, if you win, then you get the bullets that they had. And especially in China at this time, it wasn't really industrialized. So a big issue they had was standardizing weapons, but also standardizing cartridge sizes. So there are a couple of misconceptions I will do my best to try and resolve, or at least clarify. Excuse me. One of the ones I really believe that people need to understand is that during this time period, China, like I said before, China was not that industrialized. Japan may have industrialized, but if you understand the timeline and history of World War II, they aren't as industrialized as they could have, nor did they have the capacity to really have that sort of production that a westernized country, like fully westernized, such as in Germany or the United States or Britain, would be actually having. Um, the Japanese had large issues with, especially raw materials, iron, steel, and even oil. Oil was a really large driving force for the Japanese during the war, and it was in China that where things really bogged down for the Japanese, and this is where a lot of stuff actually occurred when it came to disruptions for the Japanese military. And it was a rather odd sight, to be honest. If you look at pictures, of which I will likely be posting after I talk about this stuff, the Chinese tended to have a variety of helmets, weapons, and at times, not often though, uniforms as well, depending if they were a warlord unit, by one of the many warlords in China, or by the Central Army, which is under the central government of Chiang Kai-shek. You'd have like the Style helm of the Germans, the Brody helmets of the British, and the Adrian helmets of the French. And later on in the war, they'd have the M1s of the Americans, but that's in the 40s. Now, weaponry was varied in China. How badly though is something that people don't really understand. It's like, oh yeah, you have a bunch of different weapons. It's kind of fine, but when it comes to producing it, repairing it, maintaining it, and distributing it out to the soldiers in order to shoot, train, and all of this, it gets really complicated the more differences there are in the manufacturing of the weapons and also the different kind of weapons. Because if you have a different gun, then you can't maintain it the same way as maybe you're as a soldier from a different unit or even in the same unit as yourself. This is most especially seen in the Fengtian clique, which is in the north in modern-day Manchuria, under the command of Zhang Zuolin, followed by his son Zhang Xueliang. Upon the invasion of Manchuria in 1931, following the Mukden incident, the Chinese military that was stationed in northeast China, or the northeastern army under Zhang Xueliang, it was very varied to the point that it's hard to conceive that this was allowed, let alone could have happened. This is mainly because of how the factories weren't fully unified. The many different arsenals that were making guns were kind of very decentralized. And so they came out producing different kinds of models based off of the needs, even as low as warlords under the command of other warlords. Zhang Xueliang's military, for example, By the time of the invasion, he had, I believe, around 250 to 300,000 soldiers at the time, and it was something. It was just something else. Like his military had around 20 to 30 different types of rifle models in a country that can't even properly maintain, a couple at best of the same type of rifle, had dozens of different rifle models. So each of these different rifle models had to have spare parts for each of them, had to have training for each different kind, also different ways to fix them, different ways to maintain them. And the worst of which is if these different guns were like, you know, swapped in and about within the same unit. So like you could have five different rifles within the same squad of like, eight different people. It's utterly ridiculous. For some people it seems like, they might not understand how bad of an issue this is. Because rifles, right? This isn't like we're not talking about different like types like a submachine gun, a bolt action, a fully automatic. These are all generally bolt action rifles. It's something that occurred unnecessarily, and it just happened, because of a series of political and economic issues. As a result, the Chinese military that was stationed in Manchuria, by the time of the Mukden incident, were not actually ready to face off the Japanese. Not only this, they were ordered to retreat as well upon the orders of Chiang Kai-shek as a policy of non-resistance in hopes that he could solidify and industrialize the Chinese nation as fast as possible before the real invasion of mainland China could occur. Now, before I continue, I just want to make a really quick side note. When I say mainland China, I specifically mean China proper. This China proper area is like the majority Han Chinese region, not including Manchuria, not including Inner Mongolia, Xinjiang, Tibet, or even parts of Guangxi. This is like, the provinces like Jiangsu, Guangdong, Sichuan, Beijing, and like all these other areas. This is the China proper area. Um, if you are still a bit confused, you can probably look at a map of say the Han Dynasty, and you can probably get a general idea of what I'm looking at. And so this is like the main core of China. And Chiang Kai-shek really wanted to protect this region before the invasion could occur, because I'm pretty sure that he knew that if he tried to defend China in 1931, he would not be able to. But if given a few years of peace, in order to be able to organize the military, stabilize the country, and unify as much as possible, he would be able to have a better chance at resisting in a few years later, rather than beginning to fight at that present day. Present day meaning 1931, and of which he had 6 extra years to really consolidate as best he could. Now, did he do his best at consolidating? I don't 100% think so. He had his encirclement campaigns against the Chinese Communist Party, across especially in the central southern regions like Jiangxi and Hunan especially, and even Fujian as well, like the Fujian Soviet. And but the thing is, around this time was also when he had his cream of the crop. The junior officers from Whampoa, the German trained divisions. This is the period that he really gained the strength that he believed was required and necessary in order to face the Japanese. And this is kind of where we kind of bridge into the political structures of China during the 1920s and 1930s. So, following the Xinhai Revolution in 1911, the Republic of China was set up with Sun Yat-sen as the president of China. Though, in order to gain the support needed in order for his provisional government to survive, he needed the backing of the military, of which at the time was controlled by Yuan Shikai. And in the agreement, Yuan Shikai would support the new government if he was promised the presidency. So, by February of 1912, Yuan Shikai was given the presidency, and Sun Yat-sen stepped down. And it was under Yuan Shikai which really started the warlord era as we know it. he still had the power of the military, and they all pledged allegiance towards him. Although the military of China at the time was still very decentralized as a result of the Yin Yong system. What is it? Yin Yong or Yong Ying? So the two. I keep forgetting. I keep mixing up between Yin Yong and Yong Ying. I legit can't remember. But this was the system that was formed under the Qing dynasty during the 1850s, especially in order to face the Taiping Rebellion, and this kind of created the whole warlord system. And this continued on until Yuan Shikai. Under Yuan Shikai, he basically tried to create an empire of China, a new dynasty. But because of so much opposition that he didn't expect, he eventually abdicated and stepped down and shortly died after. Because of this political turmoil and the inability for the military to actually centralize or at least, prevent the whole warlordism or decrease it to some measure, it continued onwards. And with the lack of a central authority figure to lead the military, it basically split up into several factions or cliques. And these cliques, right, or these cliques, basically formed generally around the provinces. The Yunnan clique was in the province of Yunnan. The Guangxi clique was in the province of Guangxi, and so on and so forth in Guangdong, Sichuan, Anhui, and all the other provinces of China. By the 1920s, some of them had their allegiance to Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek being basically a new Yuan Shikai by being the central authority figure for the military. But there was still a lot of infighting within the military especially, but also within the government, because there was a very close connection between government and military at the time. This is really shown when with Chiang Kai-shek, who was at this time he was the Director General of the Kuomintang or Kuomintang. He was the President of the Republic of China. He was the Generalissimo of the National Revolutionary Army, which is the military of China at the time. And it really kind of mixed in the need of the military in both military and civilian affairs. So even if the military was factionalized, it also affected the civilian governments because they too held power in the civilian governments. Li Zhongren, for example, led Guangxi, and Long Yun was in Yunnan, and Chiang Kai-shek was in Nanjing. And even then, there was still the political faction infighting within the government itself. You can really see this, say in the Central Plains War, which was the pro-Chiang and anti-Chiang factions that tried to push Chiang Kai-shek out of control from power. A lot of very, very famous political figures at the time were involved. Of course, Chiang Kai-shek, but also Yang Xishan, Feng Yuxiang, Li Zhongren, Bai Chongxi, Liu Wenhui, and many, many other people were heavily involved in this war. And this is right after the Northern Expedition that officially united China under the Republic of China, and the Central Plains War occurred 2 years after the Northern Expedition in 1930, which was just a year before the Mukden incident. And so you really, I'm doing my absolute best trying to really explain how serious, how serious China's situation was at this time. It was something that was extremely dire, and I am surprised that China even held the way it was. Though my closing regard when it comes to this period, I believe that it really had to do a lot with loyalty and centralization of the government. I don't want to really make too much of a political statement regarding this type of talk, but this is something, especially when it comes to Chinese history, the unification and the need to be a unified state and unified identity was really necessary for this time period. And without it, you'd have to rely a lot on loyalty, which tends to switch off a lot between different people, different ideas, and different struggles and battles. This is very similar to the Sengoku Jidai of Japanese medieval history, where a lot of the daimyos of Japan would tend to fight each other, but also distrust each other, because in fear that if they try to ally one another, then when they they try to get close, and all of a sudden you get attacked by your own allies. Or if you invade another daimyo, then another daimyo invade your territory while you're busy invading someone else. This is something that was also common in the warlord era, especially in Sichuan province. Sichuan was one of the few provinces that wasn't officially owned by anyone. Because of how large the province was, you'd have several factions within the Sichuan clique itself fighting each other or having some sort of stalemate out of fear that if they fought each other, they'd be too weak to fight others. The two most notable ones I can remember off the top of my head are Yang Sen and Liu Wenhui, both of whom were prominent members of the Sichuan clique. Now, when it comes to Chiang Kai-shek's call to really not fight the Japanese, it was a very debatable and very controversial decision that he made. A lot of people, especially in the northern regions, were very anti against this policy. They felt very negative towards this because he's basically allowing the Japanese to invade their homeland or end up invading so close that they'd be on their doorstep. But when it comes to that type of strategy and that pragmatism, especially when it comes to his position, it was something that a lot of people think was really, I guess, foolhardy. But I'll take the example of Liu Wenhui. So during the Long March, Liu Wenhui was ordered multiple times by Chiang Kai-shek and the National Revolutionary Army to attack the communists who were fleeing after the Fifth Encirclement campaign. But because of the Non-Aggression Pact and because of the independence of these warlords, Liu Wenhui did not act upon the orders of Chiang Kai-shek, which allowed the Chinese communists to basically escape through Sichuan in the territory that Liu Wenhui owned without being attacked. And even though Chiang Kai-shek was the authority figure, and even though he was basically the main head of the central government, and Sichuan was technically under the control of the Republic of China, Chiang Kai-shek did not have that type of control, nor was he able to enforce it because Liu Wenhui was all in Sichuan, and his troops are in the Jiangxi, Jiangsu, and Wuhan, Hubei regions. He was not able to touch Liu Wenhui or his troops or his territory, and this is in 1934 up to 1936, during the time that Chiang Kai-shek was using this time to consolidate his power. Though at the same time, he also had to do a lot of power plays, trying to balance the power and the loyalties of people under his command, like his subordinates, in order to control and keep, basically keep a semi-unified nation. There are some documentaries out there and propaganda videos, from that time, like 1944 China, that talks about the unification of China, because of the invasion of Japan. But in reality, there was still a lot of infighting. There were many units and commanders who refused to fight with each other or refused to fight unless the warlord that they were under the command of actually said himself or sent the order himself to continue an attack. Such as in the Battle of Nanjing, there was a Sichuan unit which refused to attack or to basically redeploy unless the warlord that they were under actually sent the order themselves or had the message relayed. In the battles such as in Taiyuan, both Li Zongren and Bai Chongxi, they were both of the Guangxi clique. They were excellent commanders and they worked extremely well together. But then when it came to certain issues, they tended to kind of not send their troops. In Taiyuan, right? There were soldiers, and it's portrayed in the movie technically, where how one of the commanders tried to retreat their troops in hopes to pull back and save their forces for their warlord army. And I know it's a movie and it's kind of the dramatization of the battle itself, but it gives you the idea of how some of the people really thought in the time. They thought more about preserving their portion of the army, preserving their warlord region, their control, rather than fighting for the sake of the country. And this is something that really, I think, is something that people really miss the mark on the most, is that type of feeling and that type of that type of viewpoint. And so I'm going to use the Battle of Shanghai for example. When the Battle of Shanghai, on top of the Battle of Beijing and Tianjin, they were one of the first major battles to occur in the actual Second Sino-Japanese War. Not the first 6 years that began between 1931 and 1937, but 1937 continuing onwards. Now, it was extremely vital that all the warlords would be willing to sacrifice themselves and the potential loss of their own power or military to defend their own country. So for Chiang Kai-shek, a lot of people say, "Oh, why did he waste his most best units in a battle that was likely to lose anyways? Or why did he send them all in, kind of like a gamble in hopes that he would win?" No, he did. In all intents and purposes, there was no winning for him in the Battle of Shanghai. The Battle of Shanghai was for two reasons: one, to unify all the warlords, and two, to show to the world that the Chinese would not stand down to the Japanese as they did in Mukden, as they did in Rehe, as they did in Suiyuan and Chahar. The warlords, when they see that Chiang Kai-shek sends his best units to fight in Shanghai and potentially even lose all of them, was that type of signal that he really needed in order to really show to them that he was willing to sacrifice his own power and his own authority to save the country. Now, this is a really great message, and this is something that he kind of really lost later on in the war, but it was something that was necessary to occur, especially early on, to get other warlords on his side and to get people that originally were against him to, take up arms and to reform in his support. There's a lot more to go regarding this issue, but this is kind of like a generally simplified, and I hope I can go more in depth about it in the future. Now, I did go over the actual clip or video I did for the for Minecraft, but for me, it's alright. This is my first time doing it, and so far I actually am enjoying it. It's pretty cool. I get to talk freely without having to worry about playing the game at once, but I still have content of both myself talking and also gameplay videos. Now, I hope to actually really, how to say, like, structure it a little bit better and talk a little bit more smoother and a bit more cohesive, but I think this is a really good idea. I might try it again in the future. And so, I think this is, a very nice way to kind of wrap this up. I hope you guys enjoyed. I actually thought this was pretty interesting to, freely talk about this type of thing because it's history, but also you have some sort of content you can see while I talk. I will do my editing a little bit here and there, show some photos that I was talking about and show some data that I kind of missed to basically try and clarify what I was talking about. Because I know 100% that what I say may not be accurate, here and there and so on and so forth. But I do hope that what I provide is something of a basis where you can actually work off from and to learn better from. So anyways, hope you guys enjoyed. See you guys in the next one. 再见